Eastern, so why don't we begin? Hey, welcome everybody. This is our second of three, possibly more webinars that we'll do during this interim time where most of us are working from home. I'm Todd Turner. I am the founder of Collegiate Sports Associates and will be your host today. But really this webinar is your webinar, and we hope that it will be one that will be valuable to you and that you will participate along the way with us. So let me just begin by saying that we can host up to 500 folks on these webinars. We upgraded our system to allow that. And today we've got over 250 signed up. If we're able to do some of the things we're hoping to do next week, I'm sure we'll get up to that 500 level. We're trying to work on something for next week that might be really appropriate in this time of pandemic, and how not only universities are responding to that, but how some of your partners are looking at the future, which could be really interesting. More on that later in the week once we get that put together. Our goal today is, as I said, to be as interactive as we possibly can. Your mics will be muted. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, you can click on the chat icon that is on your screen there, or that's enabled in order to raise your hand to ask a question. Or when you're speaking, it's almost easier to just hold down the space bar and you can talk and be heard. Folks can see you unless you have blocked your camera. So when you are called upon or when you want to make a comment, please introduce yourself. Give your institution when you speak and your title. So our team is really excited about doing this for the second week. I'm in the world headquarters of Collegiate Sports Associates in West End, North Carolina. A lot of people say, where is West End? Well, I am 8 miles west of Pinehurst, an hour southeast of Greensboro, and an hour and 15 minutes south of Raleigh. So that gives you a perfect idea of where the world headquarters is in the Sandhills of North Carolina. Dr. Brad Bates is with us today. Brad is our vice president, handles most of our consulting arrangements. And Brad is located in our Chapel Hill office. Drew Turner is vice president for our business affairs and business development. He's located in Raleigh, and Clay Pfeifler does our operations, a lot of our technology work, research. Clay is in Birmingham, Alabama. So that's who we are, and we're, again, delighted to have you with us today. Just a word about our business. In the 10 years that we've been working, we've worked with lots of folks across the country. I think one of the things that sets us apart from many that are providing advice or providing services to schools is our experience as athletics directors. Brad and I both have been athletics directors for over 20 years, and we've added other consultants from time to time that all have served in roles on campus. So we really think that adds to our ability to service you and to help folks grow in the profession. So that's a little bit about us and what we're doing today, a little bit of the ground rules. I want to call on Drew Turner, our vice president, to introduce our panelists today, and then to act as our facilitator or our host during the next hour and 15 minutes or so. So Drew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you to everyone who's joining us this afternoon. We're honored to have you with us. Today's panel and today's discussion will be about the transition into the AD role, and we're very fortunate to have a panel of 5 really experienced folks with some different backgrounds and different experience levels. First of all, we have Keith Carter. Keith is currently the director of athletics at Ole Miss. We have Beth Getz, who's the AD at Ball State. Alex Gary, who Alex, I don't think you've officially started yet, but was just recently named the AD at Western Carolina University. Todd Turner, who you've heard from, is our president and founder of Collegiate Sports Associates, has served as the AD at the University of Washington, Vanderbilt, North Carolina State, and UConn. So we moved a lot.
Clearly, that guy clearly couldn't get a job. He couldn't hold on to a job, man. He got moved everywhere.
And the last member of our panel is also on the Collegiate Sports Associates team, Dr. Brad Bates. As Todd mentioned, he's our vice president and manages our consulting business, but he's also served as the AD at both Boston College and Miami of Ohio. So before we start with a few questions for the panel, I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to maybe talk for a few minutes about their role into their their journey and how they got to their current position. So we'll start with Keith and let him give a little bit of his career path.
All right, thank you, Drew, Todd, and Brad. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm glad to be joined by Beth and Alex, and look forward to the next hour or so. My background is kind of unique because I was a student athlete at Ole Miss, and after playing basketball at Ole Miss, I was able to go overseas for about 9 years and play. And my wife and I actually had a home in Oxford all of those years, and we'd come back in the summers and live in Oxford. And once I finished playing, I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew that college athletics intrigued me, and that certainly it was a huge part of my life, and loved my time at Ole Miss. And so I actually jumped back on campus, initially working in the School of Business, raising money for the School of Business, which I found was really hard to do. And I learned a lot there about building relationships, and got the opportunity about 10 months later to move over to athletics and development as a major gifts officer. And from there, just worked my way up. I worked under Danny White, who was overseeing development at that time at Ole Miss, and I worked alongside Alan Green, who's the AD at Auburn. We had a great team and had some really fun times, raised a lot of money. And then when Ross Bjork came in, Danny around that same time took the job at the University of Buffalo as the AD. Alan went with him, and I was able to move into the chair of overseeing development at Ole Miss, and worked very closely with Ross for about 7 years, continued to work my way up, finally made it to deputy athletics director. And when Ross decided he was going to go to Texas A&M, which we were all very happy for his opportunity, I stepped into the interim role and did that for about 6 months. And then fortunately, Todd and Drew helped me secure the permanent role at Ole Miss. So I'm always going to be thankful to them for helping in that process. But started back in late November as the permanent AD here in Oxford.
Thank you, Keith. And Beth, would you take a second to talk about your path?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Keith said, just excited to be here with you guys today. So I also started as a student athlete, played soccer at Clemson, and had two great coaches that really truly pushed me into the industry. So sort of forced me to try my hand at coaching, and did that for about 12 years at a Division II institution, University of Missouri St. Louis. And at a small school, and certainly at that level, you get to put your hands in a lot of different pots. So learned even at a smaller place a little bit about all sides of the business. So decided that I was intrigued with the bigger picture and wanted to really get more engaged on the administrative side. So took my first full-time administrative position at Butler here in Indianapolis. So was there for about 5 years. Mostly on the internal side of the shop at Butler, doing a little compliance and student services, and I had a role as the CFO briefly at the end of that tenure. Then had the opportunity to go to the University of Minnesota. Was there for about 4 years, and great opportunity to diversify my plate, much heavier responsibility in the development area upon my arrival there. And then served as the interim athletic director for about a year at the end there. So I had an opportunity to learn through some interesting times with the Gophers. And then spent 2 years as a COO at Connecticut, and really enjoyed that experience, and got to manage a lot of the day-to-day working for David Benedict. and then had this opportunity open up at Ball State. It'll be 2 years for me in June, and also have Todd and Brad to thank for helping me through that process. And it's been a lot of fun to get started here with the Cardinals.
Thank you, Beth. Alex?
Absolutely. Well, just as Keith and Beth said, happy to be here with everyone today. I was also a student athlete, both at Western Carolina University and Virginia Commonwealth University. After playing a couple years of minor league ball in the Seattle Mariners organization, I decided to have a sit down with a couple different athletic directors, pretty prominent athletic directors, simply to understand what intercollegiate athletics was all about. And they gave me 2 pieces of advice. They said, if you want to be an AD and you're thinking about getting into a graduate program, they advised me to get into an MBA program as opposed to just a specific sports management program. Nothing wrong with sports management programs. There's a ton of really good ones out there. But in order to run a business like an intercollegiate athletic program, an MBA to them seemed to be more valuable. So I did that. They also suggested getting into the development track simply because at some point you're going to need to be able to cast a vision and get individuals to follow that vision. And as a development professional, it may not be your vision. It may be the vision of the athletic director, but that was still extremely helpful for me to be able to kind of navigate my way through the development track and ultimately get to a point where I'm comfortable expressing my own vision and getting a lot of different constituents to kind of buy into that. So that was the 2 pieces of great early information they gave me. But UNC Charlotte was a great experience. It gave me the opportunity to learn under, again, a wonderful athletic director in Judy Rose, really understand what intercollegiate athletics was all about. Had an opportunity to start a football program there, which is not something that everyone gets to do. But after about a couple of years there, University of Michigan came calling. It was a very quick process. I wasn't even looking for a job and saw a posting that was active, I think on its final day. And by the time I was able to clean my resume up and apply for that job, I think it was 10 days until I was actually offered the job. So University of Michigan was a great experience for me. I was a major gift fundraiser there that had some autonomy to just kind of go into Minnesota, go into Chicago, and go into Wisconsin and really learn development. One of the things I would say to individuals that are thinking about taking different positions, and one of the things that I really admire about the University of Michigan was that they did a phenomenal job of growing you and teaching you how to be a better fundraiser, making you stretch outside of your comfort zone a little bit too. And so organizations like that are really important in terms of deciding where you want to go, how they're going to develop you personally. I was also able to be exposed to a very high level strategic planning process. The athletic director there at the time was a former Fortune 100 CEO that really knew how to navigate, lay out a plan, especially as it pertains to strategic planning. And so that was extremely valuable and something I learned during my 4 years at Michigan. Then had an opportunity to go to the University of Maryland, and there was a ton of really great things about the University of Maryland, but the most important thing for me was being able to have exposure to 3 different athletic directors. Obviously the athletic director that was there at the time, but also 2 other individuals that worked on their senior staff that had also been athletic directors previously. So I just learned a ton from all of those individuals and was so happy to be able to recognize them as mentors. And then going to Oregon State, all the way across the country, being able to, again, learn under a great athletic director in Scott Barnes, being able to serve on an executive leadership team, and really being able to broaden my horizons in terms of what all is intercollegiate athletics about. Being a development guy, sometimes you get kind of pigeonholed into development activities, but being on that executive team for the last 2.5 years, today is actually my final day, Drew, to answer your question earlier. I started Western Carolina on May 1st and really excited about getting going here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex. And now we'll move to the veterans. Todd, you want to give your path and your career experience?
Well, I'll do it very briefly. One thing that each of you highlighted, which I think is a real pearl for those that are trying to grow in the profession, is each of you mentioned important mentors in your life and people that really made a difference for you. I can tell you that every job I had as an athletics director was really because of relationships that I've developed and people that I had relied on his mentors. Just as a first example, my first job in college athletics was as the ticket manager at the University of Virginia. This was back in 1976. A lot of these folks on this call, probably most of them weren't even born then. So it's been a long time and things were different then. But the reason I got that job was because the guy that had it before happened to have been a fraternity brother of mine and someone that I'd known for a while. His name was John Swafford. And you'll recognize that name because John is currently the commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Conference. But he had the ticket manager's job there and also had gone to Ohio University's graduate program in sports management, which I was just graduating from. And when I called John and asked him about his job, he said, well, look, you need to look at my job up here and maybe I can get you an interview with Gene Corrigan, who became really my most important mentor. Gene passed away about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. We miss him dearly. He had an incredible career as AD, not only at Virginia, but at Notre Dame, and ended up being the Atlantic Coast Conference commissioner. So, you know, that's just an example of how relationships really lend themselves to opportunity. My next stop was at the University of Connecticut. And I can tell you the reason I got involved at Connecticut because the president there was a guy named John Castine. John had been the admissions director at the University of Virginia. So again, it was relationships and knowing folks that fit together. NC State called me in 1997 and asked me if I'd be interested in that job. And of course, how do you think that happened? Well, the commissioner at the time was Gene Corrigan, and Gene Corrigan recommended me as a candidate there. I went to NC State. Then from there, I went to Vanderbilt. And interestingly enough, one of the guys at Vanderbilt at the time was a guy named Jim Foster, who was a women's basketball coach, who was very close to a person that I'd worked with both at Virginia and Connecticut, who recommended me for that position there. The person at Connecticut was Gino Auriemma, and he and Jim Foster were very close. So, you know, the point of all that is where you work and who you work for may be as important, if not more important, than what you do. You know, as long as whatever it is that you do it the best you possibly can. I think that worked for me, and I've really had a blessed career as an athletics director.
Thanks, Todd. Brad?
Yeah, and really appreciate the paths that everyone just described. To pick up on what Todd just mentioned relative to Keith, Beth, and Alex and the mentoring and the relationships that Todd had as well. I was also intrigued by the comments about the experiences that you had. Alex, for example, and I appreciate him mentioning my alma mater, Michigan, talking about how he learned from the model that they had in fundraising and strategic planning there. And all three of you had alluded to what you had learned from not only different people, but different contexts at the different schools. A couple of you made the comment, it was an interesting time, which is a really nice and diplomatic way of saying that there were some significant challenges. And so we can learn through the positive as well as the negative and the adverse as well. My experience was similar, kind of in a combination way to everyone else. I was a student athlete, had the opportunity to stay on as a graduate assistant. I really wanted to be a coach. I worked on my master's as a graduate assistant, had an opportunity with the defensive coordinator at Michigan at the time, who was Bill McCartney, to go to the University of Colorado. I worked there. On the staff, I'm an old dumbbell coach, as I tell Todd frequently. And from there, I had the opportunity to go to Vanderbilt University. Roy Kramer was the athletic director there at the time, and he brought me to Nashville. And was there for 17 years, went back to school. Todd came in, and my whole horizons broadened. And had a terrific experience working with Todd at Vanderbilt. Had the chance to go to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Was there for 10 years. And then Father Leahy gave me the chance to come to Boston College, and we had a great experience there as well.
Since then,
Thank you,
Brad,
Brad.
what have you been doing?
Yeah, so, and then Todd gave me the chance to come back to work with him, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it the last couple of years.
Yeah, but more importantly, you're on the faculty, right, at North Carolina?
I am. I'm teaching in the grad program here. Remotely though it may be right now.
All utilizing Zoom video conference. So thank you, Brad. Now we're going to move into the question and answer. And as Todd mentioned at the start of this, we really want these to be interactive. We want them to be beneficial for the 200 or 150 plus people on the call today. So, as our panelists are speaking, if something comes up, if you have follow-up questions, please utilize the raise your hand feature on Zoom, which is probably at the bottom of your screen, or the chat feature. So we'll call on you and get you involved in this dialogue. We're going to put Beth on the spot first. And Beth, so often in the industry, you hear from people that say, I pursued this job because it was the right fit. And if it's not the right fit, don't go after it. When Ball State called, what about Ball State and the opportunity to lead their athletic department made you feel like you'd be a good fit there? I mean, did you have much familiarity with the institution before? And just talk a little bit about that process for us.
Yeah, happy to, Drew. I had a little familiarity. I hadn't worked there previously, and did know a few people that were on staff, but was really familiar with the area of the country. I'm from the Midwest. I'd worked down the road at Butler for a period of time. And when that position came up, I also did a lot of research really quickly on the president, and that was truly what intrigued me, I think, the most from the beginning was the background of the president and the vision that he had for the institution. Was really excited about it being in the Mid-American Conference. I was trying to be very intentional about wanting to stay connected on the football side of things. And so then you learn as much as you can about every opportunity that may exist to see not only if that institution was something that would appeal to me, but I wanted to make sure I thought that my skill set would be a benefit to them. So that's a little bit of how it started for me, was really just a lot of behind the scenes, trying to learn as much and educate myself about their history, where they were, talk to people that had been engaged there before, to understand where they've been, and then really learn in engaging with others about where they were trying to go.
Thank you, Beth. We'll go to Keith next. Keith, you mentioned, you went through your background that you served as the interim AD at Ole Miss prior to moving into the permanent role. When you decided to pursue that permanent AD role as an internal candidate, did you feel like there was any risk in doing that?
Yeah, there was some risk. I knew, basically, Drew, the day that I accepted the opportunity to become the interim athletics director, that I was going to have an opportunity to be interviewing for the permanent job along the way. And so I tried to do everything in my power, during that time to set myself up for the opportunity of being the permanent AD. For me, I guess my path is a little different than the other two panelists because I've only been at Ole Miss. And this is my alma mater. And for me, the risk of being the AD at Ole Miss is that, if you look across our industry, ADs are not ADs at a certain place for 30 years anymore. And so, if you stay somewhere long enough, you're probably going to make some decisions that make people mad or whatever. So to me, the risk was the fact that this is my home. This is a place that I love dearly. This is a place that, I have a reputation from having been here since the mid 90s. And, for me to come in now and have this opportunity is a fantastic opportunity. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. But to me, the thought of, making some decisions or doing something that ultimately would, kind of tarnish what I've created here at Ole Miss and my past and everything that I've been able to accomplish here. That's hard. It's hard on our family. We've been in this community for a long time and, we're kind of still on the honeymoon right now, but at some point, there's going to be some decisions that are made that are going to be hard decisions and everyone's not going to agree with. So there was some risk there, but, for me, I love this place. This is what I've been trying to gear myself up for my entire career is this opportunity. And, I feel like I have a unique sense of what this place needs, having been a student athlete here. And then coming back and working for about 10 years in the department. So I'm excited about the opportunity, but certainly there's always risk. But you know what? If you don't take risks, sometimes you don't get the biggest rewards.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Keith. Alex, you mentioned your official start date, May 1. So you get the Western Carolina job. I'm sure you're probably one of the best days of your life. Your phone's blowing up with congratulatory text messages. You go to the SoCon tournament, and then the coronavirus pandemic takes place. And you're now the AD, and you're the leader of this athletic department. While you haven't officially started yet, I'm sure a lot of folks are still looking to you for some guidance in this time. What have you done to communicate and provide leadership to your department now that you're the man in charge?
Absolutely. It's a really great question. It's certainly a unique opportunity. I think, fortunately for me, Western Carolina has a phenomenal executive staff in place. I think at least 5 of the members of that executive staff have been there at least 10 years. And so selfishly a little bit, it gave me the opportunity to kind of see what the communication structure was going to look like when we were faced with something that was so significant. And after, well, not after, because we're still obviously in the middle of it, but initially, especially, I was even more excited about going into this situation because it seemed like people knew exactly what to do from a communication standpoint. They knew that it was important to reach out to student athletes, coaches, parents, as soon as they possibly could. I'll share a quick story with you. When the decision on Monday came out to allow for those senior student athletes to have another year, the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, who do we need to talk to? What do I need to say? How do I need to instruct the staff? And as soon as I heard, my hands were on the keyboard getting ready to, send out these marching orders, then I stopped myself. And I said, let's just take a little bit. Let's see how the staff will actually use this information and communicate with the coaches. There is an interim AD in place. This is a very experienced staff. And I want to make sure that I'm not seeming, I want to give the staff a chance to really show what they can do. And it was fantastic. I think a couple hours later after the news came out, our director of compliance had already structured an email. It was very clear with what some of the implications would be. He spelled everything out in layman's terms, which was really easy for the coaches to understand. Coaches had provided feedback back to the compliance director and myself and our other executive team members, just acknowledging that they understood this. And so that was really comforting for me to be able to just know that it was a great opportunity for me early on in the process, even though I don't start for another month, to really be able to know that I can trust the staff that's there. All that said, I did still feel like it was important to reach out to all of the spring sport coaches. I did that a few weeks ago, just to hear from them on what some of their questions were, what some of their concerns were, what were they hearing from their student athletes. And I just encouraged them not to feel guilty to not have all the answers right now. Don't feel guilty about taking a little bit of time for yourself and for your family during this very difficult time, because as we all know, coaches, they want to do something. They feel like that they just can't sit still, especially when they're usually coaching at this point. So it was a great opportunity for me to just really understand how the communication structure again worked within the department, from the president to the department, the athletics department, and then be able to really trust the staff to really communicate effectively with the coaches, student athletes, and parents.
Alex, we'll stay with you for this next one. We've got, on this call, we've got a lot of aspiring ADs, and most of them probably have not been through the interview process before and don't know what that looks like. Having just recently completed that process, can you talk a little bit about what that was like and what it was like to interact with a search firm and a large committee and just the whole process and how you navigated that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually the second time I've been through a process like this. So I got a little bit of an opportunity to see it before, but I knew that you guys were very communicative with me, letting me know that, look, for a while now, the committee is going to get together at a certain point and decide who they want those semifinalists to be that will actually come to North Carolina for that initial interview. And so nothing really happened for a while, but then when it did happen and I got the call that I was going to be one of the individuals that were kind of going to be considered from a semifinalist perspective, things moved extremely quickly. So not my fiance, she didn't come with me the first time, but I got there really late on a Saturday night, interviewed all day Sunday, interviewed with all the usual suspects, people with people would think. There were some coaches there, a couple student athletes and athletic staff, but also some faculty and alumni and executive council members outside of the Department of Athletics. And so understanding that my resume didn't necessarily scream, it screamed development, but it didn't necessarily scream a lot of other things, compliance, business acumen, things of that nature. I needed to really prepare myself in answering all those other questions. I didn't prepare at all for development questions because I've done that for the last 10 years. And so the experience for me was, it really gave me the opportunity to really communicate in my head and articulate kind of a broader sense of understanding of intercollegiate athletics and be able to communicate that to the committee. But after Sunday's interview, I was out in the hallway with Drew and Todd, and Todd said that, you know, this thing may move pretty quickly. I didn't know he was going to call me in a few hours to say that I had to come back west in order to, or come back east, excuse me, in order to go through that next part of the interview process. So got to the airport on Sunday, got the call from Todd and said, you need to come back out here in a couple of days. And so that was interesting. What I'll say is
there's not many direct flights from Corvallis to Cullowhee, are there?
Not at all. Definitely not. That's one thing that I would say in terms of advice. If you're ever considering an opportunity that's on different coasts like that, give yourself an extra day if you can to get there and get settled, because it can be a lot. So had an opportunity to come back on Tuesday. I think my fiance and I, she came back with me the second time. We got there at maybe 1:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, actually. Interviewed from about 7:45 a.m. to about 7:45 p.m. on probably 2 hours sleep, but it was all well worth it for sure. Again, one of the things that I really focused on during that time was everything outside of development. They're going to look at your resume and understand that you've got some experience in development, but you know, what is your experience like with the budgeting process? What is your experience like dealing with compliance issues? How do you communicate with coaches? What's your leadership style overall? All those sorts of things was very, very important for me to focus on during the process. And then on Thursday morning, I actually was woken up. I was so tired after Wednesday. I was woken up by the president, and she called and offered the job. And I literally told her that I wanted to shake the cobwebs out because I hadn't even woken up yet. And then I was still on that Pacific time. And then we went back and forth over a couple things, had the press conference on Friday, and then and that was pretty much it. Really excited to be at Catamount again.
Awesome. Thanks, Al. Panelists, anything else to add about the interview process, or you know, maybe mentors that you reached out to as you were preparing for it?
Go ahead, Beth.
All right, we're going to go. Beth, did you have a comment?
I'm good. Go ahead. You can move forward.
Okay. Well, we'll go to Todd next. Todd, you were an AD for over 20 years, and I'm sure you dealt with a lot of challenges and difficult times. Can you think of a particular time in your career where you may have sacrificed what would have been in your personal best interest to stand by your core values and what you thought was the right decision?
Well, it's a weighty question, because when you get at that point, the outcomes of that decision can be pretty traumatic. One thing I would say that for everyone on the line, whether you're an AD or in a leadership position or developing one, you know, it's really important for you to understand what really matters most, what are your priorities, and really what are those values that you're not willing to compromise, even if it puts you in a tough spot. So I can think of one situation in my career, is actually probably the most difficult situation ever, where I was asked to make a coaching change by the university's leadership. And I really didn't want to do that because I felt like the coach that we had brought into that position was handed a very short deck with a lot of issues that had nothing to do with how the team performed on the field. It had everything to do with the character and the personality and the values of the program. And the focus of that coach was really on the student athlete and their development, with the hopes that if we get things reorganized, that winning would take care of itself eventually. So I was asked to make a change, and had to look myself in the mirror and say, look, you hired this particular coach. You've advocated for your entire staff. At that time, we had almost 300 employees, the importance of student athlete well-being, the importance of teamwork and doing things the right way. And not that winning is not important, it's a critical measure of performance, but so much more goes into it than that. And I think at that point, I expressed my concerns about that to the university's leadership, and they were unhappy with the fact that I didn't want to make that difficult change. And so I realized that, and I decided that it was probably best for me to work somewhere else. And so that's where standing by something you believe strongly in could be costly. You know, if I had to do that again, I'd probably make the same decision. I might make it a different way, with a little more political savvy, with a little more proactive thinking about setting the table so that issue never really came up a long time in advance. But, you know, you learn as you go. So as you develop in your careers, you'll be faced with those kinds of decisions as well. And hopefully you'll make ones that not only are right for the industry and for the students and your coaches, but are in keeping with what you believe strongly in.
Brad, let's go back to your first AD job, and maybe even your first week on the AD job at Miami of Ohio. Can you recall a difficult situation or maybe a crisis where you realized, okay, I'm the AD now, I got to make the decision on how to move forward with this? Was there a moment that happened for you, or a time that you can think of?
Yeah, there was actually a fairly interesting moment that happened pretty quickly. So I got the athletic director job, the privilege of directing the athletic department at Miami University, and had a press conference on Tuesday. And this is back in the day when there are very few weeknight football games. They're in the sort of experimental phase. It's also at the same time when if you had a winning record in football, didn't guarantee you had a bowl game possibility. So the Mid-American Conference at the time, you had to win the championship or you probably weren't going into the postseason. And so on Tuesday, I'm announced as the athletic director at Miami University. On Wednesday, we're playing at Marshall for the conference championship. And the game's very emotional, very intense, goes down to the last 10 seconds, and Marshall wins the game. And after the game, there are fans running on the field, excited, but also there were some that were very negative towards our coaches and our student athletes. And a collision takes place between our defensive coordinator and one of those fans. I'll use the word collision. And our defensive coordinator was arrested. So literally within 36 hours of being named the athletic director of Miami University, I'm sitting at the local jail bailing out our defensive coordinator.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, at 3 a.m, I called Todd's office because he was my boss at Vanderbilt, and knowing he wouldn't be there, but I wanted to leave the message so I could seek his advice in the morning. But I said, for some reason, the phrase "be careful what you wish for" comes to mind. And so, yeah, I dove in head first from that moment on.
So to that point, I mean, how important, and this can go for any of the panelists, how important are mentors when you move into that chair, people to reach out to, because you're the decision maker? I mean, how critical is it to have somebody that you can call on and get feedback from and advice from?
Well, for me, it was very critical, and Todd really helped guide me through it. But I'd been working for Todd as well, so it wasn't just in the moment. It was my observation of his leadership skills and his decisions during adversity as well as celebration. I was also very fortunate to be working for a president, Jim Garland was his name at the time, who was sort of a veteran higher education administrator and just really wise gentleman. So the quick answer to your question is relying on the expertise of people you really trust can be very, very important, particularly at times of adversity.
Thank you. Anything else from any of the other panelists on that?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to, oh,
Drew,
okay, Keith, go ahead.
add one thing real quick. I think that, Todd in his introduction, really laid it out the way that it works. And, it's about relationships. And I think that, as you grow in your career, getting to know as many people as you can is so valuable. And I think having, just a few of those that are your close mentors and the people that you can go to and ask professional questions, personal questions. There's so many different things that come up as you grow in your career. And then certainly once you hit the chair, things come at you really fast. And so I think having those people that you trust and having people that, as Brad just mentioned, that you can call at 3 a.m. in the morning and bounce something off of them. It's so important to have those people. So I would encourage everyone listening, certainly to develop a network, but you've got to develop those, 2 or 3 or 5 people that you can go to in tough times.
All right, we're going to go to the audience here, and we're going to go to Brian Blair, who's the COO at Washington State. Brian's got a question. Brian?
Alex, I really enjoyed your response to that last question, your thought process going through the interview. I'd love to hear from Beth and Keith, particularly on being interim candidates. Beth, I know you were interim at Minnesota for a time, and Keith, obviously being an internal candidate at Ole Miss. I'd love to hear your approach, how you expressed your interest, and how you navigated the process.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start and get to hear your voice, Brian. Yeah, it was really interesting for me at Minnesota. It was never, the process happened pretty quickly. So the decision to serve in the interim role happened well before I had any considerations of wanting to be considered for the permanent position. And so, I think anytime you do these, have these opportunities, your first responsibility is always to serve the institution. And so stepping in and doing that at a time where they need that leadership, as Keith did as well, that's the first decision that you're certainly making. And so, for me at Minnesota, that turned out to be a little bit longer of a runway, I think, than I anticipated. But it was a great experience to have a chance to partner with some great senior leaders in our department and across campus during that time, and learned a lot and had an opportunity to go through the process there as well. So it was a good experience overall for me.
Yeah, I think that, being the interim, you do get a great opportunity to kind of showcase what your vision is and your leadership style. The other thing that I failed to mention on the question that was asked earlier about risk is, in the interim role, if you take on that responsibility, and as Beth said, we actually had an interim chancellor at the time who asked me to do it. And about halfway through his question of, do I want to do it? I said, yes, absolutely. I want to do it. But the thing you've got to remember is that if you do the job and then you go through the search and you don't get the permanent job, in my position, there was a good chance that I was going to have to go somewhere else. And so, there was some risk there as well. But, for me, I think the interim role, what I tried to do was just put my head down and work. I think that, you can try to, lobby and talk to different people. And of course there's some of that, and you're, continuing to build those relationships and talk about, your aspirations along the way. But I think what people will remember too is, what did you do during that interim period? Did you do good work? Did you accomplish things? Were you able to move things forward? And I think we were able to do that. So, I was always raised just to do good work, and people will notice. And I think that's what happened.
All right, we've got another question.
Drew, let me say this, because we were part of the search that Ole Miss conducted, and I would say that during the interviews with the final candidates, a fairly small committee, what was it, Keith, maybe 8 people on the committee, something like that, and we're sitting around the table, and the thing that I think worked best in Keith's behalf was he didn't assume anything. He treated the opportunity as if he were coming from outside the institution, presented himself with great humility, very passionate about his vision for the program, kind of stepped outside of his previous role to look a lot more globally at the athletics department and what it needed and what the university needed, in fact, to make the best of its future. And I think he didn't assume anything going into that job and competed for it and earned it in every right. So you're to be complimented on that, Keith.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Steve Eigenbrot from the University of South Carolina. Steve?
Hey, gang. It's a question for the group. I know a lot of people on this call are either sport administrators or work directly with sports in their role as, senior staff members, wherever the case may be. But when you became an athletic director for the first time, did you feel like you needed to change the way you built a relationship with the head coach, maybe serving more as an advocate as a sport administrator, as opposed to now you're an athletic director, you got to keep coaches maybe at arm's distance, or you feel like it was kind of important that you frame that relationship a little differently, being true to who you are in both instances, but also understanding there's a nuanced difference that's kind of important there?
I know I'm not in the chair yet, but I'll go ahead and try to address that one. I think that one of the things that I've already talked to our executive team about is, as an athletic director, I don't see myself being this specific sport administrator for one sport without someone else there with me. I think the previous athletic director had several sports that he was, just overseeing himself, and it's not something I really wanted to do. I think that from a sport administrator standpoint, we're actually working through a situation right now where I want to make sure that our sport administrators feel that they have the relationships with the coaches, that they can make decisions, even tough decisions with the coaches, because I think that's one of the only ways that they will grow. And so as a sport administrator, previously and before I was able to sit in the chair, one of the things that I always noticed is that I wanted to be the one in the room talking to the coaches about important decisions. And so I think as an athletic director now, you kind of see that from even already, even in, the announcement was just a few weeks ago, you already see and can identify when you are in that position as a sport administrator, the type of dialogue and relationship you wanted to have with the coach and how that's different as an athletic director. As an athletic director, I still want to make sure that the individual sport administrators have the direct access or in all the important conversations so that they can learn and grow too. At the same time, I want to have personal relationships with all of my coaches, whether it's golf or football, and I want to allow them to make sure that they know that they have access to me at any time. At the same time, making sure that those sport administrators are able to really feel secure enough to be able to have those important conversations with the coach. And not all the important conversations are just going to be had with the athletic director.
Yeah, I might just add, I mean, the dynamic changes just by nature of the roles. But I think for me personally, I think you always really have to invest in relationships, both the professional and the personal side. And so you did that as a sport administrator, and I think you do that in the athletic director's role as well. So I don't know that I think it feels differently in the way that I would choose to invest in that relationship from a day-to-day standpoint. But I think you've got to really build that trust in a different way and be authentic in each of those components of that relationship. Because there's not another party that's going to jump in and engage in a debate or in decision making there. So I just think you've got to be really authentic and invested in that relationship, both personally and professionally, regardless of what chair you're sitting in.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, those are both great insights. I think as a sport administrator, for me over the past few years, I always felt like my job was to lighten the load for the AD, to try to be a buffer If there were some hard conversations that need to be had, I was the one that would have those and try to work through those. And a lot of times we would get through those and they would never even make it to the AD, which was a good thing. And so now sitting in the chair, we got some great sport administrators that allow me to kind of be at a little bit of a higher level. You know, I think the sometimes if there's some friction in some of those hard conversations, it's better for that to be with the sport administrator in some ways. That's how I felt as a sport administrator. And I feel like the ones we have here now do a great job of being that buffer. And I come in and have to make some decisions at times. Obviously, I'm involved, you know, as we talk about contracts and those type of things. But I just think that there's a healthy balance there of certainly building a personal relationship. And again, I've known the coaches here at Ole Miss for the past 10 years. And, you know, as I've grown up here in the business, so I have a very close relationship with all of our coaches. But now when you start talking about if we're going to extend your contract and you're the ultimate decision maker on those type of things, the dynamic does change some. And so I just think it's got to be a balance. Certainly relationships, if you're a sport administrator or the AD, is the most important thing. You have to build the trust, as Beth said. But I do think that there is a little bit different relationship between the sport administrator, what I did the past 3 or 4 years, to what I'm doing now as the AD in the chair.
Let me comment on that, if I could. Those are excellent points. You know, the idea of being authentic, Beth, I couldn't agree with you more how important it is just to be yourself. The idea of trust and transparency and accessibility, those are all important things. You know, I'll just tell you a little story. One of the things that it took me a long time to learn this as an athletic director, but one of the things that I wanted to instill in my head coaches was the idea that we were a team, and that they didn't work for the University of Football or the University of Baseball. They worked for the university, and that we together as a group needed to do that. So I had this really, I would call him our high-profile legacy coach at one of the institutions. He was a tough guy to deal with. Every time we would have a staff meeting, we only had 3 or 4 a year when everybody came together, but when we had a coaches meeting, you know, the call would always come to the office. Well, I've got recruiting and I got somebody coming in. I can't do it. So I went over his office. I said, hey, you know what? Someday you're going to need me to be on your side and be your teammate. He said, I need you to come in here and be my teammate and be the guy sitting on the first row, asking the right questions, contributing the right kind of leadership to what we're trying to do here in our athletic department. And he fussed around and he kicked chairs and he cussed about it. And the next day he was on the first row, sitting there before anyone else with the best comments of any coach in any meeting I've ever been a part of. And we became a team. So I just tell that story because I do think as an athletics director, instilling this idea of a support and mutual support is really, really critical. In addition to being authentic and being yourself and having good relationships, you know, it's a team, and that's exciting.
Hey, Drew, I'm not real sure why you have us here as panelists, because you have Todd. He could answer all the questions. All the answers.
Because I've been listening to him my whole life, Keith. I had to get somebody else on here. We're going to go next to actually Beth's deputy AD, Haven Fields, who's the deputy at Ball State, has a question. Haven?
Yes, sir. Appreciate you guys on the panel. It's always funny having your boss on one of these and having to ask a question. But just curious, you know, obviously we're in some unprecedented times. A lot of questions to continue to come up about budgets and perspective. Just curious how you guys are handling those discussions, knowing that moving forward, you know, some of your operation or some of the things that you're doing may change financially.
I'll go first. You know, for us, we basically kind of put a spending freeze in place right now. We're not hiring anyone new. We are doing a softball search. Almost like, you know, essential positions are the only ones that we're going to hire right now. But we're just kind of watching every dollar right now. You know, as at Ole Miss, we had to refund season tickets for baseball. So we're in the process of doing that. Obviously we're monitoring very closely everything that's going on in our world and how that's going to affect our fall sports. But I think this situation that we're in has really made us all just kind of look at every dollar from an expense standpoint. Right now coaches can't be on the road. There's really not a lot of expense that they need. And so we just kind of implemented the spending freeze. And, I think for us, we're trying to use real-time information to make the best, decisions that we can. But obviously this thing changes daily. It's so fluid. But yeah, it certainly could change the way, we operate. And I think we've just got to take it day by day and make the best decisions we can with the information that we have.
Yeah, on Monday, I was just actually talking to our business office associate, and one of the things that he communicated to me was that there's actually going to be some savings that we'll recognize too. And so while we're thinking about the lack of revenue, we don't have a ton of revenue personally in our spring sports. But when we think about some of the savings on that side of the ledger too, for us, especially considering the fact that not many people know about this, but a couple of years ago, there was something introduced called the NC Promise in the state of North Carolina for 3 different institutions, which basically said that tuition is going to be extremely reasonable, both for in-state and out-of-state students coming into the university. And so we had actually been able to recognize some savings that we were able to carry over from the previous year based on the lesser tuition bills that we're going to have to pay. And so we're not in that bad of a shape considering everything there. But one of the things that we're trying to implement as we think about some of these decisions is certainly the savings side as opposed to the lack of revenue side, and in conjunction, with the lack of revenue side.
All right, I want to go next to Mark Wright from the Deputy AD at Central Florida. Has a question. Mark? Mark, are you on the line? All right, we might have lost Mark, but we'll instead go to the other Deputy AD at Central Florida, Eric Wood, who also has a question. Eric, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Thank you guys for the opportunity and for serving on the panel. My question is, talk to us a little bit about how you engaged the president's cabinet when you first got in the chair. Was that within the first 2 weeks? Did you call everybody? Did you try to make in-person visits? Surely you have donors on the athletic side you need to engage immediately. So just interested in how you approached that or advice you were given that you can share with us. Thanks.
Go ahead, Keith. Start us off.
Well, I was going to let y'all go first because again, my situation is so unique. I had known all of those cabinet members for almost 10 years, and had worked closely with our CFO of the campus and our provost and everyone that is around that table. And so I had some obviously relationships with them, but now working in a different role, sitting around the same table with them is different. And so we've had to kind of build a different relationship, certainly with the foundation with what we had before. But now as we kind of make decisions together, the dynamic has changed. But we've always had, I really think at Ole Miss, we pride ourselves on having great relationships across campus. Our campus partners are so, really on the same page on so many different things. So we've just tried to continue that. We have a brand new chancellor as well, who was just hired before me, about 2 months before me, back in the fall. And so there is some newness to that table, but having the relationships that go way back, it was very valuable.
Yeah, I would say for me, I spent a lot of time building those relationships and feel really fortunate that, our cabinet, and really this is probably the direction of our president, but we really do operate as a team. And so they started from the beginning really with open doors and how they could help me to be successful. So tons of time right off the bat with the CFO, and I think on a campus like ours, the size that we are, and the financial model and the structure, there's just a lot more interaction that's necessary. And so I thought that was really critically important. They also could give you, at least in my case, the cabinet had been here for quite some time for the most part, so they could really talk you through a lot of the history of how things had operated and help you navigate campus from a political standpoint as well as an operational one. So I think that was really time that was well spent early on and was really important for me in helping make the transition as smooth as possible.
And Eric, while I'm not quite there yet, I am a little bit spoiled from the standpoint that the interim athletic director is actually the CFO and Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration at the university. And so I've had a chance to talk to him quite frequently about several things so far, but it would be the plan whenever we're actually able to touch base in person with people, to make sure to get to know personally and intimately all of the executive council, just to make sure that they understand that a cross-campus positive relationship is something, just like I talked about in the interview, that is going to be part of the administration when I get there May 1.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alex. We're going to stay in Orlando because Mark Wright got the mute button figured out. We're going to go back to Mark. Mark.
All right. Thanks for all your time. As you're searching and going through your interviews for each of you, what was the most surprising or challenging question that was posed to you, and what was your response? Beth, Alex, which one would like to start?
I can start, Beth, and I forgive me, Mark, I don't remember the exact question, but it had something to do with crisis management, and it was something it was actually from the president herself, and it was something to the effect of, if this situation took place, basically what's the first thing you would do? And my answer, and I think she appreciated it, was the first thing that I said that I would do was make sure her office was involved. And that communication alone, I don't know if she heard the rest of my answer, but she was just so happy that she knew that with significant issues that could disrupt the image and brand of the university, the first thing she wanted to see was that the athletic director or anyone that would report to her position would communicate with her office first, just to make sure that they were included in what was going on. So I think that was an important part of the response to her, especially as it pertains to a potential crisis situation.
Yeah, I may say, and I can't recall the specific question, but I think the CFO of the university cabinet had asked the question, and so responding to some of those, if they're asking something specific and not knowing an institution's financial situation, can be a little bit challenging. So from a formal type question, that was probably it. But I will share another one that I think just speaks to trying to figure out how to convey who you are and how you're going to operate. I think this was my second in-person interview, and I walk in to sit down with the president, and right out of the bat, he says to me, "Hey, you come across as being pretty even keel," and everybody said, you're pretty level-headed. And he said, but how am I going to know that you're really, excited and pumped up and ready to go, when we're sitting there watching a game? And I thought, I'm never getting this job. I thought he wants somebody that's going to be a cheerleader and really energetic. But I gave an honest response. You got to be, who you are. And so it's, if he's, I said, hey, if you're sitting next to me, there's a good chance you're going to get an elbow here or there, or if we're grabbing something to eat after the game, you're really going to know how I felt about that. But my everyday demeanor is going to be a little bit more, I think, timid in that moment. And we talked a little bit about that. So I think sometimes there's moments where you're trying to anticipate what you think somebody wants, and that decision point about how you're going to respond. And again, it may have meant in a particular case you weren't the right candidate, and that's good to find out then anyway. But those were the ones that I thought were maybe more difficult when you catch yourself trying to anticipate what is it they want to hear as opposed to what is your genuine response, because they're gonna see you in action at some point. So you've got to figure out how to be authentic and honest in that moment.
I think for me, the question that really kind of the hurdle that I had to get over in my interview process was the fact that we had other sitting ADs that were in the process. And obviously I had not been a sitting AD. And so the question was asked, why do you deserve this job, more than somebody who's been in the chair for a couple of years or, whatever that looked like. And so, for me, where I tried to go with it was the fact that I did have the institutional knowledge. I had been at Ole Miss. I had worked very closely with Ross on a lot of big decisions along the way. And that while there might be somebody who was sitting as an AD somewhere else, I'm not sure that their experience there trumped my experience at Ole Miss. And I just tried to, to validate that and to keep talking about that and how, again, as a student athlete, having worked in the department for 10 years, while I didn't exactly have the experience in the chair, my specific experience at Ole Miss was what would make me potentially a better candidate than someone else. So had to win that battle, and thankfully some people bought it.
Before we move to the next question, I want to go to Todd and get his perspective on, if you get that really difficult question in the interview process from the search firm's perspective, is there any advice that you'd give somebody when they get a really difficult question, they don't know the answer immediately? How do you respond to that?
Well, that's really a good question because, and Mark, I'm glad you asked it as well in the broader context. Beth probably nailed it. You just have to be authentic and be yourself. If the worst thing you can do is to deliver the answers that you think they want to hear, because if they're not genuine, they will come across as terribly rehearsed and contrived simply for the point of trying to check a box for the committee. I would really like for folks to be, if you get a tough question, to pause and think briefly about it, or you may want to follow up with a question of your own to get clarification on something. But at the end of the day, the best interviews are always conversations, and conversations do have pauses in them. You're not immediately able to respond in some cases. One of the best questions I've heard people ask is, cite a situation in your life where your reaction best reveals your character and your values. And that stumps some folks. There could be some long pauses in trying to think back through your career. Gosh, wow, what does that really mean? Some people give spectacular answers to that. Others say, boy, I'd like to think about that. Can I come back to that or something like that? So, being yourself and being authentic, as Beth said, that's really the key, I believe.
Thank you, Todd. We've got a question. We're going to go to Rick Cantor at Longwood University. There, Rick?
Yeah, I'm right here. Thank you. Beth talked a lot about the element of establishing trust. Also, Todd had obviously an example of talking about accountability with the coaching staff. This kind of goes to everybody. How did you go about setting what your cultural standards are within your department? What was that process like? What did it look like? How long did it take? And anything you have.
I think for me, Rick, having been in the chair now for about 4 months or so, as the permanent AD, I think some of that is still being, still happening. And, we're actually working on a strategic plan that we hope to kind of launch before the fall semester starts. But I think the main thing is that you just have to live it. You have to live what your culture, what kind of culture you want to have. And you got to earn the respect of people. You have to treat everyone the same, from the custodial staff to to the chancellor of the university. And I think that when you do that, people do, respect you, and they understand that you're going to work alongside them. I love what Todd said about with the coaches is making them feel like they're a part of the team. And I think everything we try to do at Ole Miss, and we have some silos, obviously everybody does, but we try to do everything collaboratively and try to let a lot of people give input. We do what we call external teams, where there's somebody from every unit around a table, talking about a plan for whatever we're talking about. And there will be people that are, interns, all the way to deputy ADs, giving input in that meeting. And I just think you've got to give people the opportunity to feel like they're a part of the mission, to feel like they have ownership of it. But I think the bottom line is they have to see you, walking the talk.
Yeah, that's really well said, Keith. It's not, and I think sometimes you think you want to put some bullets about this is what culture is going to look like, but they're descriptions for what you build after you model it every day, and the consistencies and the decisions you make and when you show up and how you show up. I think that's where it's all going to come out. And hey, we're all in this because there's nothing we love more than being a part of a team. So I think that was a great way Todd explained it in terms of just a individual relationship with another staff member. But I think it's, how do you build that same feeling that they have in their sport with your department? And you'll know when it happens because you'll be able to feel it.
And Rick, not having quite been there yet, I think that one of the things that I did learn at a previous institution is that collaboration, when you're talking about culture and setting expectations, is something that is vitally important. I remember going through a strategic planning process as a young employee at a previous institution. I really felt like I had significant input on what some of our key drivers were, what some of our strategic initiatives were, and exactly how my day-to-day work every day filtered up to what the ultimate goals of the department are. And so, there's certainly going to be a vision of certain expectations for how we will work, led by the athletic director. But in terms of just overall culture, having your executive team and other members of your staff be able to really script out what that looks like collectively, I think is extremely important, and is a part of a process I'm looking forward to starting here in the next couple of months.
Summarizing a little bit what I just heard, which I thought was fantastic, a couple things. And it took a while for me to learn to do this. The minute you slide over into the athletic director's chair, the way people perceive you, even Keith, those that you've worked with forever and forever, now it's a little different. You have to be careful about what you say because you may be thinking out loud and they will take whatever you say as being, oh, wow, this is what we should be doing. When in fact, you're just operating maybe mentally through a process. You said this in so many words. You've really got, as an AD, have to walk the talk and do it consistently. Consistency in a role of a leader is critically important to have people believe you. And if they don't believe you, they're not going to follow. So walking the talk and being consistent in how not only you conduct yourself, but by laying out the expectations that you have for the people around you, the culture will eventually reflect your values. It takes some time. And maybe the great thing to do after you've been an AD for a while and have been in a unique setting for the first time is to bring key decision makers together and have them begin to articulate what that culture really looks like. In some of our strategic planning work, that's one of the first things we do is have groups of people come together and say, what matters most here at our institution? How are we going to operate? What are our values? What's our vision? How are we trying to achieve this thing? And then you've got, as the AD, my experience was, if you didn't walk that talk, and if you didn't act consistently and have expectations that were consistent with those values, then people wouldn't follow you. So that's a real incredibly important responsibility of the AD.
I'd even take it a step before that, and I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, it really begins with you as a candidate making sure that your values align with the culture of the institution, making sure that your profile fits, because you're not going to change a university's culture. You're going to have some influence on it. You're going to shape the vision and the direction of the department. But institutions have cultures that have been built upon years of traditions and experiences. And so it really starts with you assessing what positions you may be interested in and how your values align with that institution.
All right, we've got time for one more question, and then we're going to close out with a brief recap from Todd. And we're going to go to Lee De Leon, who's the Deputy AD at Louisiana, with a question. Lee?
Thanks, Drew. Good to see everybody. I want to go back to the idea of how to handle difficult head coaches. Todd had a great example earlier, but for, Keith and Beth and Alex, who are, first-time ADs, a lot of these people are older than us. They make more money than us. They're more high profile than us. And sometimes they don't want to buy in. They don't want to do what you're asking them to do. How do you get them to buy in and to get on board with you?
Well, first of all, we don't have any difficult coaches at all. So we don't have to worry about that. No, and we really do have great coaches, but certainly there are situations that pop up where you don't agree. You're not always going to agree. And so I think that I love what Todd said about making them feel like they're a part of a team. I talk a lot about locking arms with our coaches and having the same vision. And, again, I think if you can get across to them that ultimately, our goal as an AD, anything they ask, we want to say yes. We will try to find a way to say yes. But there's going to be some times we have to say no. And I think if you can work with them, build trust, build the relationship, even though you might have a hard conversation, what I've found is that a lot of times, the next day they're good. They understand, they'll move on. But coaches are very interesting. They're very strong-willed. Like during this time, all of our coaches are trying to get creative. They're trying to think of ways to do things and different things that they want to do and send and, communicate with our student athletes. And, some things we just can't do. And so you got to talk to them, talk them through all the scenarios. But I do think sometimes you got to find a way to give them some wins. And if you can do that, then at times when you have to have those hard conversations, they'll understand.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Keith. I mean, you're going to have those difficult moments. I'm really fortunate that we also have a great group of head coaches, but I think they want to know you're being honest, transparent, giving them real information, owning a decision if it's one you're personally making, and then also trying to find other ways to accomplish what they might be asking for if you can't get there the way they originally wanted to. But it goes back to having that relationship, and in that moment, it may be a challenge. But if you've got that foundation, I think that reset can come pretty quickly.
The only thing I would have to add, and really just getting into this myself, is that as my conversations with coaches already have been, that I do want to partner with you. If the expectations are for you to compete for championships, then we need to have resources to match those expectations. And that's one of the challenges that we have at Western Carolina. That said, I've also been very clear with them that while I want to be there and partner with them, while our entire administrative staff wants to be there and partner with them, we're not going to be able to do everything. And just letting them know that in our very first conversation, I want to help you, but there are going to be some times that we have to say no. And just coming to that agreement in an early conversation with a coach, especially just first getting into this, has been a goal of mine so far.
All right, Todd, to close us out here, I want to ask you a question and then let you talk a little bit from a search firm's perspective. Your first AD job was in 1987. The AD role now is, it's a different position. What are presidents looking for now versus what they were looking for 35 years ago?
Well, that's a great question. And in fact, I'm prepared to answer it. So I've done this a couple of times. I've made a list of things I've heard presidents say when they're looking for their new AD. And I've got 8 or 9 points here that I'll share with folks. I'm really interested in comments from Brad, Beth, any of you that would add to this, in every position that a president hires, they want someone of character, someone with integrity. That means no blips in your background. And if you've got a blip in your background, you need to learn how to express that plainly, openly, because we're going to find out about it in our background research on you. If there's been a DUI, or maybe you got suspended from school or something along your life path, dealing with that as an adult and explaining that, I think, is important. So that character, integrity, that's honesty, that's being open, and that's really a non-starter for a lot of presidents that are looking to hire folks. Obviously being able to think quickly, to be clear and decisive in your thinking, someone with intelligence. These jobs are not for the faint of heart. They're for people that are creative, that are thoughtful, that are full of integrity. And I think that's really an important characteristics. Obviously having business competence, meaning the ability to manage not only the resources that you're given, but also being able to go out there and grow those resources. I can tell you that when I talk to presidents about AD's jobs and what they're looking for, almost immediately out of their mouth comes the idea, we need a rainmaker. We need somebody that can help us increase our resources, to increase our visibility, to help our university succeed, not just on the field, but across all realms. So being able to grow and manage resources, if you don't have that in your background, you need to go to your athletic director and say, give me some opportunities to demonstrate and learn about managing resources and growing them in particular, whether it be fundraising or marketing, or just in some other creative way. I think it's really critical. The ability to understand budgets, to negotiate contracts, whether they be with your equipment apparel dealer or your multimedia rights holder. I think those things become important benchmarks in your preparation for the job. Clearly being able to manage people. It's hard to go into an AD interview and not be able to say, yeah, I've managed a staff of 10, or I managed a staff of 15, or managed a staff of 3. If you haven't managed anybody, it's a real risk for the university to hire someone that is going to be learning management on the job. That is not easy. Clearly understanding a balance sheet, knowing about revenues and expenses, and how to work within the university's budget system is important. I hear presidents also say, we need a leader in this job. And when they define that, what they're really talking about is somebody who has the ability to inspire, who can motivate people, who is able to assemble a team and then lead that team by motivating them and holding them accountable at a high level. But to do that, they've got to have a vision. And that vision's got to be able to, they got to be able to articulate it. And then this is really important. It's sort of a sub point under here that's not listed. Not only do they have to have a vision, they need to have some understanding of how to attain that vision. That's why strategic planning becomes such an important thing. If you've got a chance to participate in a strategic planning initiative on your campus, you should do it, because then you would be able to see the components of what goes into achieving or pursuing a vision in a more detailed way. A couple other things pretty quickly. Obviously, the ability to communicate well, to speak comfortably and extemporaneously without any preparation in front of various groups, whether they be faculty or parents of students or the media. As an AD, you're going to be called on when you least expect it to represent the university in some kind of a forum, whether it be live or even on the internet. I mean, that's going to happen. And in that regard, I think today, as much as anything else, understanding how technology has changed our world and being able to demonstrate to a president or search committee, how am I going to use technology to communicate that great vision I have and to motivate people to follow that vision? So you need to understand technology. If you're not familiar with Twitter or Instagram or, Teamworks or any of those elements that are out there today, you need to become very familiar with how to make that work for you. Not lastly, but this is really critical. So many people are so focused on the job they want, they forget about doing the job they got. So, being a strong and consistent performer in your current position, that's probably what got Keith Carter that job at Ole Miss. If he had not been focused on what he was doing every day, he would never have been asked to be the interim, and then ultimately the athletics director there. So that's really an important thing. And then we've talked about this throughout this presentation today, this discussion, a really strong network of relationships. And I want to talk about the difference between an advocate and a reference. An advocate is someone that would pick the phone up without you knowing it and call someone they knew at a position that had a position that they thought you would be good for and say, you need to hire this person and here are the reasons why. That's an advocate. A reference is some name you put on your resume. And oftentimes I've seen this happen. People put names on their resume, you call the reference, and the reference doesn't really know much about the person that put their name there. So look for advocates who will represent you without you even knowing it. It's really cool. To be effective in the job, you've got to have colleagues that know what challenges you're facing. It's just like today. We've got, we've had upwards of almost 200 people at times on this call today. Colleagues that empathize with you, that understand what you're doing, your challenges, and you can call them and say, what do you think? I mean, Brad, he left me a message. I couldn't help him because I was asleep, but he called me with a problem at 3 a.m. I value that. I think that's really important. And then I said this before, I'll say it again, where you work and who you work for is maybe more important than what you do, although you better be a strong performer in the job that you've got. I also would say that, and my good friend and colleague, Kevin White, who's the athletics director at Duke, gives a great lecture on how to manage the number ones. And really what he's saying there is that having some ability to be politically connected with what makes things happen and how decisions get made is so very important on a campus where you've got so many constituent groups. Knowing who the ones are, the people who can really make those decisions and make them happen, and being able to navigate that is critically important. The last thing on my list is if you want to be at the FBS level as an athletic director, then some involvement at a pretty high level in the management of football, I think is an important thing. Now, I may have left something out. I do want to mention one other thing that's not on the list here. I heard this from the president just the other day. We were talking about what he wanted in his athletic director, and he said he wanted a corporate athlete. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, it's someone who can lead people to their peak performance. And he said they do that in a holistic way, looking at training them and modeling for them the importance of nutrition, sleep, collegiality, physical health. It was the whole person, which I thought was a marvelous way to look at the athletic director's job, because if you can prepare yourself holistically to be in that leadership role, you're going to get that opportunity. Now, I may have left something out, and if anyone on our panel wants to add something, please do. Any comments from anyone?
Well said, Todd.
Well said, definitely.
Well, that's what, just an old guy, you write these things down all the time, and it happens. Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for taking your time this afternoon to spend with those of us that are on the call. Next week, as I said, we're hopeful to have something that's a little more topical about dealing with the immediate future. More about that as we come. But Alex and Beth and Keith in particular, thank you for taking your time this afternoon. Your comments, I'm sure, were well received and will be helpful to these folks moving forward. Hey, everybody, stay safe. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.